Hi everyone, it's Gavin J, the best thing since the private jet. And you're listening to Therapy Suite right here on UKF Radio, the world's number one talk of radio. This week I speak to Malcolm Robinson, biomedical scientist. We discuss him being the founder of Harvey's gang. Welcome to the show, Malcolm. How are you doing?
Fine, thanks very much. Thanks for having me, Gavin. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for, taking the time, Look, Malcolm, tell us a bit about your background and, how you got to where you are today.
Well, I'm a biomedical scientist, and I started training back in the Royal Navy in 1976 and started my work then when we were very busy in laboratories, when we had 20 samples a day. Now we deal with tens of thousands of samples, so things have changed quite considerably in that. And I started my journey as learning biomedical science and being part of surgical support teams in the Royal Navy, and thoroughly enjoyed that side of life, and then came out of the Royal Navy and went to the Middle East to work, where I worked in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, where I spent a couple of years and met my wife over there. And I then came back to the UK and started work in laboratories in the UK in the NHS. And I worked in various places and ended up coming down to Worthing in 2006. And that was the start of my journey down in the NHS in blood transfusion down in Worthing. And I was named the Biomedical Scientist of the Year 2018, which was a pinnacle to my career, being recognised by people within my trade as being at the top of the world, as it were.
That's fantastic. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And it went from there, winning various awards, and I was on the NHS 70th Thank You Award on the BBC The One show for winning the award for children's healthcare as well, which blew me away. And I won the late great Dr. Craig Granger's Compassionate Care Award. And as a biomedical scientist who never sees patients, it seemed a bit bizarre winning a Compassionate Care Award.
Well, I think you've done loads. What was your interest when you were kind of growing up, and what was your interest that led you into the field that you're in?
Well, I got interested in science at an early age. I loved maths and physics and playing around with chemistry sets, which I got as a sort of 11-year-old present when I was 11, and thoroughly enjoyed that side of things. And I found out that there was this career called biomedical science, or laboratory technicians, as they were called then, laboratory scientists. And my father was in the RAF, so I knew I wanted to follow in the service footsteps, but not necessarily in the Royal Navy, in the RAF. I loved the sea, and the Royal Navy was perfect for me. And I just loved science, and found out that if I did 5 O-levels, including all 3 sciences, I could actually go and train in the Royal Navy as a laboratory technician. So that's what I did. And, from there on, my interest was taken up with learning more and more about science. And science, as we all know nowadays, changes on I would say, a regular basis, not even daily, perhaps. It's by the hour by some of the exciting experiments and work that research do. And we continually learn. And, to this day, I'm still learning, everything that we're doing. The last sort of couple of weeks, the blood sciences and blood transfusion world and NHSBT have now started doing genetics on blood donors to overcome some of the issues we have with sickle cell anemia and thalassemia. Which is really, really exciting. And hopefully, we'll be able to provide better blood transfusion care to all these very difficult patients. Not that they're difficult, it's treating other diseases are sometimes difficult.
Absolutely, yeah. That's amazing. Basically, let's start with, who was Harvey?
Harvey was a 6-year-old inquisitive boy, and he went down the South Downs with his family on a toboggan when we had snow in Worthing. And we don't get snow down in the South Coast very often. And he came down there once and he lay at the bottom of the hill, absolutely exhausted. And his parents took one look at him and said, well, come on, up you get, up we go again. And he just didn't have the energy to do anything. And he was very pale, so he looked a bit sweaty, pale. So they said, oh, perhaps, that cold's got the better of him. We'll take him to the GP and see what the GP says. So they took him off to the GP, and the GP took one look at him and said, I think he's something wrong there. He's not quite right. Take him to A&E, get some blood samples taken. So he came to a hospital in Worthing and had some blood samples, and he was very inquisitive. He said, well, what are those samples for? Where are they going? What are you going to do with them? Why do you need them? And so he had all of these samples taken, and they said, well, away you go home, and the results will be back with your GP in a couple of weeks. And with a follow-up from there. They went home, and 2 hours later, they got a phone call from A&E to say that Harvey's blood hemoglobin was 36. Now, in real terms, that should have been about 130 upwards, but it was only 36. And so they said he needed an urgent blood transfusion that evening, and could he come back into A&E? So they brought him back into A&E, quite concerned at this stage. And through that journey through A&E to the paediatric ward, they had more samples taken, and we had a second blood group and save for his blood transfusion. And needless to say, Harvey said, well, you've had those samples this afternoon. Why do you want some more? No wonder I'm needing a blood transfusion. You're taking it all out and putting it in tubes. What's this about? And so we did his blood group down in the laboratory, and he was AB RHD pos, which is quite a rare blood group. And because of his condition, we didn't know what was causing that low hemoglobin, and there were indicators that something was afoot. And so we needed special irradiated blood down, and we didn't have any in stock, so we had to get that down urgently from London. So we got that ordered. A couple of hours later, we had it, cross-matched it, and gave it to him. And after the transfusion, he had samples to see if the transfusion had worked and what his hemoglobin was now, hoping it was around about 100. And again, Harvey said, well, you've had those samples, now you give me a blood transfusion, now you've got more samples. Yeah, what's this all about? Why do you need that? And he got questions answered a little bit by the nursing staff and the paediatrics and the consultant paediatricians, but he didn't get all his answers. And he had these transfusions, and in the process, we did further tests and diagnosed him with acute myeloid leukemia, which is not a good start. And as part of it, he then started his treatment with chemotherapy and radiotherapy, and he asked questions the whole time, and the paediatricians and nursing staff said, well, we can't answer those, perhaps somebody in the laboratory could. And they asked me whether I could do something about it. So I said, yeah, sure. I'll give him a tour of our laboratory. So Harvey came down, and he was 6, quite small, but quite big for his age. And we continued that, and we had samples taken, and he had lots of samples taken. And sorry, I've got a bit of a loop here myself. He came down, and he had a small lab coat, it came down to his ankles. It was huge for him, but it was the smallest one we had. And I had a picture taken with him in his white coat. He had cropped hair, the same as I did, and he was a little me. And we sat in front of the blood grouping machine, explaining what it did. He was asking questions the whole time. That particular machine took 33 minutes to do a blood group and antibody screening. He sat there the whole time asking questions. For a 6-year-old, that amazed me, absolutely amazed me. And we showed him all of our fresh frozen plasma and our platelets and our red cells. We showed him how the full blood count machine worked and the lasers and everything else. Showed him down the microscope at his cells. And he went away quite happy. his mum sent me a picture of him and I taken and just said on it, thanks very much for everything you've done. Really appreciate it. And Harvey signed it. And I thought, oh, that's nice. I'll keep that in my continual professional development folder for, record of things I've done, and thought no more of it. And Harvey had regular transfusions, and that we didn't see him then for about 14 months. And everything seemed to be okay. And then all of a sudden we started getting transfusion samples for Harvey. Now his blood group was A RHD negative, so his blood group had changed, and we thought, oh, this is a bit strange. What's going on here? And we found out that he'd had a bone marrow transplant at the Royal Marsden. His 14-year-old brother Max was his bone marrow donor, and that's remarkable, I think, as a 14-year-old. And he'd had 14 months of a good life with this bone marrow, but the results were indicating that this bone marrow had started to fail. And we started giving Harvey some transfusion, but it turned out it was palliative care at this stage. And we said, well, this is really sad, really sorry. Please find, platelets attached. And I sent up a picture of him and I, just said, thinking of you, mate, hope all's okay. As it was, it wasn't. And we arranged with the hospital in Derriford in Plymouth for his last blood transfusion to go out to a campsite caravan park in Devon. And there, surrounded by his family, he had his last blood transfusion. He passed away in that setting, which is very sad. And I got asked a couple of days later by the play specialists and paediatrics whether I was going to Harvey's farewell. And it's not something I've ever done before. And I thought, well, why would I? I only met Harvey for 3 hours. Seems a bit strange. They said, no, Malcolm, we think you should. You had an effect. I went, well, okay, if that's what you think, I will. And I went to the crematorium in Worthing, and there was standing room only. There was 2,000 people in the Worthing crematorium. And on the big LCD screen, they had a picture of him and I up there in our white coats. And I went, what's that about? That seems a bit weird that, I've known him for 3 hours and I'm such a big part of his farewell. And when he left us in his Monsters Inc. white coffin and to the music of Somewhere Over the Rainbow by Eva Cassidy, I just was in bits, absolutely traumatized. And afterwards, his mum and dad came over to me and he did. And I went, I'm really sorry here, but what did I do? I gave Harvey a tour, and that's really all I did. She went, oh, no, Malcolm, you've got no idea, have you? I said, well, no, I don't. She went, well, come and have a seat and we'll talk. She said, well, Harvey and I left the laboratory. He was still in his white coat and he lauded it over the doctors and nurses as he walked past in the hospitals, introducing himself as Harvey, a biomedical scientist. He got back into the play area for the paediatric ward, and he used his cardboard ID badge to go through the magnetic card reader in the hospital for security. Obviously, those that knew that that wouldn't work, but the nurse on the inside saw him and pressed the button and the doors opened for him. As far as Harvey was concerned, his life had changed. He could go anywhere with his ID badge because he was a biomedical scientist. And he could answer all the questions of all his fellow patients about what happens to their samples, where they go, which machine are we doing, who the personnel are that is in the laboratory going to be working that day or that evening. And he answered all the questions. And he wanted to do the tour at the Royal Marsden as well, but they weren't geared up for it. So he became the postman at the Royal Marsden, and twice a day he went round in his wheelchair with a post bag on the front basket, delivering post, asking everybody what they did and, saying he's Harvey, a biomedical scientist. And so his healthcare journey was much easier than it could have been because of the tour that we gave him, apparently. And consultant pediatrician Malcolm said, if you're up for it, he said, I've got another 7 kids that could do with a tour. And I was devastated. I went, wow. I said, well, we'll have to come to some sort of deal that you'll have to get better at your job so I don't have to come to any more farewells, and I'll do something about it. And so that's what we did. Now, one thing that we do well as biomedical science is reflect. And we reflected on what went well with Harvey and what didn't go so well. What went well was the idea of the tour, the process through the laboratory, what we were able to show him. What didn't go so well was the white coats. They came down to his ankles and he had to turn the sleeves up. The ID badges were made of cardboard. They weren't proper ones. We had a lanyard that was just an NHS lanyard, and it wasn't a proper lanyard. We put various pens in his top pocket because all scientists need pens in their top pockets. But they were not standardized. And we had a few pieces of paper to look like a notebook. So we needed something there. And we needed a bag of some description to put it all in. And a certificate of attendance to say that we recognise that on this day, this person was a biomedical scientist and they came around and put some notes on it. So we thought, okay, we can do all that. How do we remember Harvey? Well, we came up with the idea of Harvey's gang, and that's where it started. And we approached a company, Ortho Clinical Diagnostics, who very kindly gave us the goodie bags with a logo, which we have now got, and the contents, which includes a Harvey's Gang lanyard, a Harvey's Gang notebook, a Harvey's Gang coloured set of crayons, Harvey's Gang pen, all in a goodie bag. This was brilliant that we had all these things. We then designed a Harvey's Gang certificate of attendance that we could use standardised. And we thought, oh, that's great. So we'll do that at Worthing. And that's what we did. And a week later, we had our first pilot, a young lad called William. On the 31st of October, being Halloween, he went through and had his face penned with spiders and things. And then he came down for a tour. That went well. So we thought, okay, we'll launch it. And 7 days later, then we had a young lady by the name of Francesca Evans-Jones, who was our first tourist, and she was Fanconi's anemia at 8. She was 8 years old, and she came around, and the communications teams also brought in the BBC South to film it for us. Now, her question when I was giving her a tour, now remember she's 8 years old, her question to me was, Malcolm, do you ever think we'll grow solid organs from stem cells? And I went, what? Where did a question like that come from an 8-year-old? Unbelievable. And the idea started, okay, this really works. And I then presented it at a local transfusion meeting, and people said, boy, this is really good. Yeah, can we do it? And we went, well, yeah, we've done all the risk assessments, we've done all the forms, we've got the attendance certificate. I'm not proud. Everything is in Word format, so you can take our trust logo out and put your trust logo in, and you can use exactly the same format. So it's all standardized. And we started locally down in Chichester, and then went from Chichester along to the William Harvey in Kent, and then along to Southampton, and then Portsmouth, and then eventually got up to London. And as of now, there's 145 potential sites that can give Harvey's Gang tours. And we've got lots of young patients going into various places, seeing what happens to their blood samples. And these explanations of where we're able to give has helped some of these youngsters overcome needle phobias. And we thought, oh, this is something, unheard of, where parents have to hold children down, perhaps, to get their samples taken. It's never a thing that you want to happen. Now we see the youngster, still with a white coat on, having their arm looked at by a phlebotomist, samples taken, having eye-to-eye contact, and having no issues whatsoever. And we've overcome that issue of needle phobia, which is fantastic.
That's brilliant. I think what you've done is amazing. Look, we're just going to a quick ad break, and then
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Malcolm, take us through a typical tour, Harvey's gang and what someone will go through, basically.
Okay. Yeah. So we get informed that a youngster requires a tour, and we will send out a questionnaire to the parents to explain what Harvey's gang tour is, and they send down an application form as a back page back to us. Now, what that tells us is about the child, about how old they are, how big they are, because obviously we need the right size to make sure we've got the right size coat for the child. Also, what disease they're being processed, whether they've got any concerns or worries that they would like to know about, any particular issues that they would like to know, any particular questions. So, and also that if we know what the disease is, it helps all the scientists locally to understand more about what that disease is and what the treatments are, because then they can see that particular maybe leukemia patient comes in, they can put that patient's face to that particular disease for themselves in future to refer to. And we mentioned to start with that there were so many samples that we deal with now. We can never put faces to those samples, but all of a sudden we see a patient and we can put a face to a name. So the patient turns up with their family and their siblings maybe, with the play specialist or not, with a porter to show them around, who are, God's gift around hospitals because they are fantastic. And they come and see us or see one of the biomedical scientists who escorts them around the laboratory. And we introduce them to the person in that area, be it blood sciences or be it transfusion, microbiology, histology, who's going to show them and explain what they're going to see. We show them the machines that we've got that we do the work on. A hematology machine, maybe we've got two usually of each site at least in case one goes down. And we might have Wallace and Gromit. We may have Woody and Buzz. So we give our machines names. So we're able to show them what the machines are. We can show them by opening the doors where the samples are processed, where the lasers are that do that processing, so they can understand the process that the samples go through, see the barcodes being read and the barcode going through the hospital system from the patient to us, back through our system, back to the patient again. We can then hopefully know beforehand that day is coming and have a sample from that patient. We then make a blood film so we can actually look at the red cells and the white cells and the platelets of that patient with the patient and their family, so we can able to explain what we're seeing down in the microscope. We've seen patients come in where the young requiring some chemotherapy. Now, to have chemotherapy, you need to have a neutrophil count above 0.05. So, sorry, 0.5. Now, if the neutrophil count is below 0.5, they have no chemotherapy. So you see a child with her big brother coming in and see the count being 0.6. And he sort of puts his arm around his sister and says, at 0.6, you can have the chemotherapy day, with a smile on their faces. I mean, that's just remarkable, absolutely remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. And it puts our own woes and our own fears and our own difficulties with life into perspective. Yes, it's a busy day. Yes, it's stressful, but nothing like those. And they've got smiles on their faces. So we give them a tour around all of the laboratory areas, and we get the child to show us how to wash our hands, just to make sure that they're fully participating in the tour. And they teach us how to wash their hands properly, etc. And so by the end of the tour, then we say to them, right, any other questions? Here's our business card. Let us know, and we'll answer all of your questions. And they go out of the laboratory then in their white coat with our goodie bag of everything that they've got. And so they're seen sometimes going down into the cafeteria or even out into town and having lunch with the family, still in their white coat, still talking about what they've learned. We had a young couple of twins, Annabelle and Claudia, who were 5 at the time, both with neuroblastomas. And they were seen that evening at home by mum that they were in front of the telly dissecting Dolly, and the leg came off of Cindy. And one turned to the other and said, well, that's it. We need a blood transfusion urgently then. And it just showed how much that they'd learned from us on that day of the tour.
It's fantastic, and what's amazing is that they're so young and they're learning so quickly about, what's happening and maybe the condition and all the rest of it. I think it's just fantastic. You mentioned some advantages, like, for example, some of the kids have been able to overcome needle phobia because they've gone through the tour. They see what it entails. Are there any other advantages?
It seems that they take more control over their own healthcare, particularly where we had a young lady with needle phobia where she was born without a thyroid gland. So she needed thyroxine on a regular basis, which is toxic. So she needed regular samples to make sure to find out what level of the drug was in her system and how much she needed. And then she was able to take more charge of her own healthcare. Diabetics, they're able to think about the quality of samples that they allow to be taken and have them going into the laboratory. And they're able to take better care of their own health because of joining us at a tour. So we are seeing a lot of benefits with our patients. And it takes a lot of the scariness out of hospitals. I mean, they're not nice places a lot of the time for most people. And for kids, particularly, undergoing radiotherapy, chemotherapy, and lots of blood tests, it's not nice. And they don't get many good days in hospital, but this is one of the good days, and they look forward to it. And strangely, they look forward to having the samples taken thereafter, which is bizarre. They know where the samples are going.
Yeah, I think it's just unbelievable. Have there been any challenges at all?
Yeah, some of the challenges are making sure that the patients are well enough on the day to have a type of tour. And we are as flexible as we can be. And if we have to cancel it, we cancel it. If we have to cut it short, we cut it short. It is difficult. The children go out of the hospital with their own. That's theirs to keep, and it's a record of that day that they have it. But kids grow, and we went to a fete last year, and I had a young deaf lad come running across the fete in front of hundreds of people, shouting my name, and I didn't recognise him because I hadn't seen him for a couple of years. And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, yes, yeah. How are you?" And his mum caught up and was able to sort of help me with my understanding of what he was saying. And he'd had a tour a couple of years ago, and he still had blood tests done on a regular basis. But he was so unhappy because his lab coat didn't fit him anymore. Luckily, on the particular day, we had lab coats, to advertise what we were doing. So I gave him one. And he was over the moon. And he wore the lab coat in the middle of summer around the fete for the rest of the day, advertising what we did. So it was better advertising for us. It was just fantastic. And we were able to sort of overcome his concern that it didn't have a lab coat anymore that fitted him. But we see patients that are sort of sometimes more difficult. We've had patients with autism and ADHD and other sort of difficulties. And some of those can be quite challenging for us, and especially when we don't know the patient very well. And I had one child that, was hugging mum's leg the whole tour. And I was talking with the child, or I thought it was, all the way through. And at the end, mum says, "Oh, thanks very much," and all the rest of it. That evening, I had a note from the child to say thanks very much. And there were a couple of questions that I didn't get answered. And it showed that the child had been listening the whole way through. And it was just remarkable that, there is that level of interest and intellect in these youngsters. I mean, Dr. Google has got a lot to answer for, but, youngsters are sponges for information.
It seems it. I mean, I just think it's amazing. Are there any success stories at all? Actually, before we go into that, we're just going to another quick ad break and we'll be right back.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
So, Malcolm, success stories rise. I mean, has there been anything at all from the tours and Harvey's gang and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, for Harvey's gang, we set up as a charity, and that's gone well. We've now handed over to the Institute of Biomedical Science to take that forward for us. We've won awards. I mentioned earlier about the NHS 70 Thank You Award. I've won Biomedical Scientist of the Year. We've won the Dr. Sue Hill award for compassionate care. But one of the biggest successes, I think, is seeing patients, recover and get better. And the biggest one I know of is that the patient's has now been in remission from his disease. He's now completed a biomedical science degree at Plymouth University, and he's applied back to Southampton Hospital to do his work experience and to complete his biomedical science specialist registration portfolio, which to me is absolutely brilliant. It's a complete
Fantastic
circle.
Sorry, I was just saying that's fantastic. So I cut you off there. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
I'm absolutely blown away by that as a success, and I was hoping that this might attract a future workforce. It'd be good advertisement for who biomedical science are and the Institute of Biomedical Science, and it's now coming to the fore that we are out there and people are now starting to see us and hear of us, which is brilliant news.
I think it's amazing. Just tell us a bit more about being a biomedical scientist. What does it entail?
Well, we are the recognised workforce within laboratories that are qualified to state registration, and we follow standard operating procedures and quality control procedures to make sure that whatever results put out are put out correctly to the right person in the right time frame, and the results are right first time. It's regulated, it's heavily regulated, and we work very hard every day, 365 days a year, 24/7, getting those results out. So whenever you go into a hospital or you go into your GP and they take any samples whatsoever, it's into a laboratory, and biomedical scientists are the people that process those samples. And yes, we work with consultant pathologists, but the work itself is done by biomedical scientists. And we head the team, and the results go out knowing that we've done it right, and they go out, and they then may go to a healthcare scientist who then may discuss that result with the patient in particular instances to make sure that the right treatment is given to the patient. It's a number of years of work, to get a biomedical science degree. It's a 5-year degree along with state registration, and we then do a specialist portfolio afterwards, to become a specialist within an area of a laboratory. So for myself, I was a specialist in microbiology to start with, and then into blood transfusion. So I've done 2 areas, but other people have done more, and some people have just done one area. And it's a lifelong learning journey. We do continual professional development all the time to make sure we are current thinking. And our tests, once upon a time, were all done manually. When I first started doing a full blood count, we used to dilute everything in solutions, put it into a counting chamber, and look down the microscope and actually physically count the cells that we were seeing. Now, because we deal with tens of thousands, we have machines that do that. However, we've got to look after those machines to make sure that those machines are accurately recording the correct results on the correct patient, and need to make sure that we understand that process as well. So it's a lifelong process of understanding what we're doing, why we're doing it. And because we deal with tens of thousands, we have, to a degree, we've lost the patient in that process. We haven't got the luxury to think about the patient. Harvey's gang has brought that back to actually remind us that actually the reason we're doing that work is because we've got a patient at the end of it. And sometimes we'll see a sample that's not been taken very well, and there's blood, on the outside of the tube, and we once upon a time might have complained bitterly, saying, look at the state of that, we've got to process that, or do we? Or do we just throw it away and just ask them for a repeat? We've got no idea of the journey that patient has been through to get that sample. I mean, woe betide us if we threw that sample away and that patient was being held down by mum and dad whilst they tried to get a sample, and all we did was throw it away because we weren't happy. I mean, that's just disgraceful. So it reminds us why we do what we do. It reminds us that let's see what we can do with that sample, if it's possible to do something with the sample. And let's get the correct result to the patient based on what we have got. And we hope with Harvey's Gang tours, the next time the patient comes in, they're much more at ease, we get a better quality of sample, and therefore we can do the full workup with quality results that go back to the patient that they can do more with the diagnosis and treatment of that patient. So it's a full circle of looking after that sample and that patient sample.
No, of course. Gosh, I mean, where's Harvey's Gang right now?
Well, we are in 142 plus sites around the UK and further afield. Our furthest site is Tasmania in Australia, which is fabulous. We've got interest from another couple of hospitals in Australia, which we hope to come through. For the last couple of years, we've not had much expansion in Harvey's Gang because of COVID and the restrictions of patients and families coming into hospitals, let alone into laboratories. But those restrictions now are easing, so we're starting to see more and more tours again. But we are in all of the countries in the UK. We are hoping to get into the Republic of Ireland, and we're hoping to go into other European countries as well. Site 100 was Harvey's Gang USA. They've not taken it further forward yet because of COVID, but because of the size of the country and because the healthcare will work differently in America, they're going to be setting up separately as a separate charity at some point in the future. And they have asked myself and Harvey's mum to be trustees of their charity when they do successfully launch, which we're very excited about, that could really take off over there.
It's amazing. I think it's fantastic. It's going in the right direction and is expanding as well, I mean, what is the future for Harvey's Gang?
Well, my concern was that, I've been a volunteer, I've founded the charity and I've been a volunteer for Harvey's Gang and have got it as far as I could. But I'm getting older and older and more frail. And I'm not able to look after it as much and spend so much time doing things. So I was concerned about, the longevity of Harvey's Gang. And I was in conversations with the Institute of Biomedical Science, which are our registered body. And there are over 28,000 registered biomedical scientists as part of the UK Institute of Biomedical Science, IBMS. And they have agreed to take on Harvey's Gang. So now they're going to be doing the management of and doing all the communication with the individual sites, the Harvey's Gang teams, and support those teams to take it forward and to support those teams on the early days of them actually starting. I've agreed that, I don't want to just let go. So I'm there to help and help other sites start, be there for advice, be there on Zoom or Teams meetings if necessary, to help where I can, to explain what we do and how Harvey's Gang tours can be set up in the various sites and overcome particular issues. Some of the issues that we have is a risk assessment is simple when we're an adult, because we look at things critically as an adult and we say, okay, everything's in the right place and all the rest of it. But we don't think of it as a risk assessment as a child, and the risks being at 2'6" level as opposed to 1'6" level. And so we've got to look at where the biohazard bins are, where the sharps boxes are, because normally we just leave them on the floor. However, if we're going to have a child coming around, that's at hand height and head height. So we need to look at those sort of things, and it's just to give them advice about what we should be thinking about when we're doing those risk assessments.
And risk assessments can be quite. I know they in each field, any field, they can be quite complex, can't they?
Yeah, they can, and it's making sure that what are the risks? Are we saying that we're getting these seriously ill patients into our laboratories? Well, yes, we are, but no, we're not. When we're getting them in there, we're hopeful they're at a stage in their treatment where they're not neutropenic, they're not at risk of sepsis, they're not at risk, they don't have any open wounds or anything like that. So we're making sure that they're in the best physical state that they can be in. And we've got to make sure that we understand what illnesses they've got. I very early had a patient come round, and she had recovered and she was in remission and everything. And I was trying to explain about a centrifuge, and the centrifuge is spinning down samples very, very quickly. And I was explaining that this centrifuge spun everything down at 3,000 RPM. Now, if that was a car engine, and so she could understand it, but she couldn't understand what the spinning looked like. So I actually said, okay, I'll lift you up and show you. And I lifted, with my permission, lifted this young lady up to show them that the centrifuge spinning around. And I was saying to Mum afterwards, I said, she's looking remarkably well now. She went, yes, apart from having brittle bones because of the chemotherapy. And I went, I've got to be a bit more careful then when perhaps picking up these children to make sure that I don't actually affect any brittle bone issues.
Oh,
so it's ongoing learning.
What's the future for Malcolm?
I'm at the moment, enjoying the knowing that the pressure for Harvey's gang is off. We will be closing the charity down for the IBMS to continue work without the charity work, and I will be helping the IBMS grow Harvey's gang, and I'm quite happy to talk at lectures and presentations as well as at various meetings. Who knows what's around the corner? My wife is retired as well, and for my retirement, she bought me a paddle board. I've still yet to master that. I use it as a mobile diving platform at the moment. I spend more time in the water than I do actually on the board. But hopefully at some stage I will master that. And it keeps me fit and keeps me out of trouble.
100%, absolutely. Keeps you fit, I think. It keeps anybody fit, isn't it? If anybody wants to reach out to you or find out more information about Harvey's gang, etc., what's the best way to do it?
The best way is by email as a first point of call. It's at harveysgang@gmail.com. So that's harveysgang, all one word, @gmail.com. And then we take the email and pass it to the relevant team or person. I've had various texts and Facebook messages and Twitter saying about a family member and they've got any chance of a tour, and then I point them towards the email to be able to then talk to them in a confidential way to find out where the family are based, where the children's healthcare is based, and then put them in touch with the hospital in that area that is actually doing the Harvey's gang tours. If there is no hospital in that area, then it's a reason to try and encourage that hospital to start. And so I put the ask hat on to try and go out and try and find biomedical science in that local hospital that might be interested in starting, and then start the conversation with the laboratory to try and get them to start.
Fantastic. Malcolm, thanks for your time today. Much appreciated. And, thank you for Harvey's gang. I think it's great what yourselves are doing. And, look, wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you very much indeed. Very much appreciate it. Really appreciate talking to you, Gavin.
Thank you. And, thank you to our listeners. You can find me on Instagram at GavinJ417. Until next time, take care.